Hi guys, my name's Caroline, and in this video I'm going to walk you through the creation of a little game that I made in Unity. It's called Endless Coil. So it's basically a game of Snake. I originally made it for a jam, and then I carried on working on it after the jam to sort of like tidy things up, add a load more polish, extra features, kind of like juice it up a little bit and just make it a lot better, just do everything that I wanted to do with it. So this video is a start to finish devlog. So I basically recorded everything that I did along the way, kind of step by step as I was incrementally doing something. It includes all of the sort of like mistakes I made, the difficulties I made, all the refactoring. There was one thing that I refactored about 4 times. So it's literally everything, just from start to finish, how I've made the game. So if you don't know me, I'm a new kind of Unity developer. I only started at the beginning of January 2025. We're currently August, but I had a break of several months, and that is actually the reason why I've made this game and this devlog. So I had a break of nearly 3 months, and I'd only been working with Unity for a few weeks before then. So when I came back to it, I found that I had forgotten everything. And so I wanted to do another game which was going to be like super simple to get into, which was a game of Snake. It's actually a little bit more complicated than a regular game of Snake, but that's just what I started with. But what I also wanted was to be able to come back to this video later on and re-watch it if I ever needed to know how I did a certain thing. And this is what I didn't really have before, and I found that when I came back to Unity after that break, there was so much I forgot and I just felt a little bit lost. So this video, really, I've made this for me so that I've got a reference to look back to. So if I want to know how I've done something in one of my previous games, I've got a recording of it. So this is something that I'm planning to do for my future games as I go along. But the chances are it might be useful for somebody else. You know, if you're wanting to make a game of Snake, it might be useful to see how somebody else has done it. Now, just a disclaimer, as I said, I am a beginner to Unity. You know, whilst I've got some programming experience, my game development experience is not very much at all. You can play the game that I've made on itch and all my other games which are on there. So this is the 5th game that I've made, but they're all very small. So yeah, I'm not an expert. There's probably much better ways to do some of the stuff that I've done, you know, but I'm a beginner. So there you go. So I hope you find it interesting or useful. And I'll get into it. Thanks. Finally started work on a new game. It's going to be something really simple because I haven't touched Unity in almost 3 months, about 2.5 months, and I've forgotten everything. So I'm entering another game jam, and similar reason to before, actually. They are providing a free course for all submissions. So it's a week-long jam. Actually, no, it's not. It started a few days ago, but I've only just got started with it. So the theme is unexpected mashup. So I'm doing something really simple. It's just going to be a game of Snake, but with a kind of a twist. So all I've got so far, I've got some nice sprites actually. Have I got them on here? Yeah. So this pack by Pixel, this is a really nice asset pack. So it's got all of these different snake sprites, all these different kinds, and then it's also got these arenas. I don't think it shows it in there. Yeah, some arenas around the edges. So I've got this one here. All I've done for the moment is I've just repeated this particular tile. So this arena object is literally just a sprite, just with a sprite renderer, and I've just sized it to 15 by 15. Now all of these sprites are imported as 32 pixels per unit, which is what size they are, and same with the snake. So all I've done at the moment here is I've just got the snake head up here. I've tagged that to be the player. I've got a game manager object, but this is empty at the moment. And I've got very little code. So what I want to do is have this, you know, obviously the gameplay in here. So yeah, there's no code in this one yet, so it's just the snake code. So all I'm doing here, handle input, So this is just reading the keyboard, WSAD. These and statements here, just make sure that you can't go back on yourself. So if you're already going down, you can't then go up because you'd go back into yourself. So it's not going to allow that. Just setting a timer, so this is going to move every half a second, and then the start position, this is going to be where is it? So in here I'm taking the bounds of the arena object and then using that to offset the position of the actual snake. So it doesn't do a lot at the moment. I can move the snake head. Doesn't look very good because it's not rotated. So I can, and I'm just so it moves on its own. So all I'm doing is changing the direction. So if I'm left, I can't go right. So I have to go up and then right. Can't go left from here. I can only go sort of like up or down. So we've got basic movement there, and that sort of tiled background, I think it just is going to make the game just slightly easier to play because you can see, what the actual grid is. So to get the rotation correct for the sprite, I put a little helper function in here. So this is taking the direction vector and then it's just doing this little math thingy. I had this the wrong way around at first. I put in X and Y and I was very confused. And then you use that Euler angles. So quite honestly, I don't really understand most of this stuff. I had to look it up, but it does work. So it still looks a little bit funky, but it does work. So on the right, and then up, and left, and down. So if you kind of, I mean, I wouldn't allow it to move sort of that quickly, but yeah, if it sort of moves quickly, it's a bit weird. But I'll see how it looks once I've got more of the actual snake going. Just done a slight refactoring. I've given the arena its own little class now where it calculates the bounds itself and exposes that as a public property, because both the snake and the game manager are going to need it. So the snake needs it to be able to determine its position, and then the game manager, which I'm about to use, that is going to spawn some, it's not going to be food in this game, it's going to be pots of gold. I've got a prefab for this now, and this is what it's going to be spawning. So the way my game will work, it's going to be different to the regular stake. There's going to be several pots of gold kind of like all around that you can go and collect. This is the prefab, and so the game manager needs to have that, but it also needs to know the arena because it needs to know where to spawn them. And I've also fixed that little problem where the rotation of the sprite was looking a bit weird. And what it was is I was allowing it to be changed at any point. So now you can only actually change direction on the next tick. So that makes it look just a little bit better. So all I had to do for that was, where was it? So I had another variable there for the direction and then the new direction. So I store this up, but I don't actually change it the moment that the input button is pressed. I only change it when the timer ticks over to the next tick. Alright, so what I've done now is I've given the game manager the arena object, and then I've just had it just spawn a ton of these pots of gold, just so I can test to make sure that the bounds and the positioning are correct. So I've got that sprite now, and yeah, there's 100 of them. You can't pick them up or anything yet, but they're all sort of spawning in the right place, so that's fine. So I can move on to the next part of the code now. Now put in the mechanism to collect the gold. So both the snake and the gold prefab have got a collider on them. I've made the snake to be a trigger as well. And so then what that allows me to do is, where is it? Snake. Just put an on trigger entry. So I've tagged, we should close down the asteroid. So I've tagged the pot of gold with the gold tag, so I know what I'm collecting there. And then I'm using an event system, which I prefer to do, so I'm simply invoking an event to say that gold has been collected, and then I can have other objects. So in this case I've got my game manager, which is going to be responding to that event through collect gold. At the moment I'm keeping track of the score, but I don't have a UI yet, so I'm just going to log it out to the console, and then I'm just going to spawn a new one. So at the start of the game I'm spawning 10, so there's always going to be plenty of gold for the player to collect. So if we If I just load that up now, so we've got a few up there at the moment. At the moment, I haven't done any kind of bounds check-in, so I can still go off the screen. But yeah, it just spawns new one. And if you have a look down on the left, we can see down here it's keeping track of the gold that's been collected so far. So I think I'll probably leave it like that for the moment. I want to start working with the body of the snake now. So I've got several pieces here. At the moment, I've just grabbed the body one. I've actually got that down here, and I've made that into a prefab. It's literally just a sprite, and then all I'm doing to start with is I'm just creating a list of the transforms. I don't think this is going to be enough at the moment, but yeah, I've just got the transforms there. And then when I grow the snake, so I'm calling that from here. So when I pick up the gold, I'm also now calling this grow function, and what that's doing is it's instantiating a new copy of that prefab, and it's adding it into the list. It's copying the position from the last one in the list. So this kind of works, but doesn't. It's got a major problem. So yeah, as long as we're going right, it looks fine. If I go in any other direction, it's going to look pretty terrible. Actually, right or left, yeah. Because obviously those particular prefabs are designed for that way. So of course, what I need to do is, in the same way that I've rotated the snake head, I need to be able to rotate the body part. And then I'm also going to have to figure out the corners, and I think that's going to be trickier still. So at least I've got a growing snake, but yeah, this doesn't look too good right now. I've had to rewrite a lot of the code. It's still doing the same thing as before, but I wasn't really understanding quite a few of the things. I've set it so that it's got an initial size of 3 now. So it still is kind of working in the same way, but I'm just gonna just go through what I've had to change. So first of all, one of the things that's really confusing me is in Unity, 0, 0 is the center of the space. So where that snake is at the moment, because that is set to all zeros, it's over here. Whereas I was thinking in my head that 0, 0 was in the top left corner for some reason. I don't know why. So what I've done for the arena is I've reworked the class. I've got a load of debug logs on here, so I could really get my head around it. But the transform position is actually the center of the arena, and I was mistakenly thinking it was the top left corner, which it's not. So I've kind of explicitly put this in the code here. Now I'm calculating an offset, which is based on the size of the arena, and then I'm creating a bounding rectangle rather than the actual bounds object, because I found that easier to use. And then when I'm spawning my pots of gold, I've got a method here to get a random spawn point, and it's using that bounding rectangle. And I have to be careful with the Y here. I was doing Y min to Y max, and it's actually Y max to min because of the way the Unity screen is laid out. And then I've also just put in something here just to see if it spawns in a cell where we've already got one, then it will just spawn another one instead. And then on the snake class, I'm storing a list of segments. Now at the moment, the segment class is just completely empty, but I want to use that to store things like the previous direction, the previous position, because I'm going to need that for when I'm trying to work out how to rotate the sprites and which sprites to use. So I've kind of got this as like a placeholder. And then what I've also had to do was I got confused when I was trying to add the head. Basically the head component, the snake itself, needs to get added at the start of the list as like the first item. And the problem with that is that the snake is not a segment, so I had to make it one. So basically I've added the segment script onto the snake object as well as the snake itself, and it took me ages to get my head around this. So I'm basically getting the segment component so that I can add it into my list. So moving the segments is as before, it's just copying the position from the one in front on the list. So I haven't yet done any of the rotation stuff. I needed to get all of this working properly first and get my head around it before trying to do that. So again, I'm kind of back to where I was in the last part of the video, but hopefully this is structured a bit better now and I'm kind of understanding what I'm doing. One of the things which is also confusing me with Unity is the way that objects are created. With Unity, with a mono behavior object, you have to create that by using the instantiate keyword. What you can't do is so over here, so you're instantiating a new prefab here. What you can't do is use the new keyword, because I was thinking I could put in a constructor in here and pass in things like the previous direction and position, but you can't do that. You cannot mix the new keyword like you would in just any other kind of C# and Unity, because with Unity the engine itself takes over the object lifecycle, so you cannot use the new keyword with an object which is instantiated, which is basically with a mono behavior object. So I don't know if I'm explaining that properly, but I wanted to put this in this video because I'm pretty sure this is something that I figured out months ago when I was working on Astroworld, and then I've forgotten it in all the weeks that I've been away from this. So I wanted to kind of capture that so I don't get stuck in this kind of rut again. So the next part again now is trying to figure out how to do the rotations and selection of the sprites. I have now managed to get the kind of movement code how I want it. So one thing I've had to change is I've had to take off the part where I set the size at the beginning. So it starts off as just a size of 0, just the head basically. And then what it does is it starts to grow. As you can see now, all of the sprites are working. So it's a corner when it should be a corner. The tail will change direction. Both the head and the tail will change the way they're facing based on the direction. So if you look at that tail sprite there. Now in this particular implementation of Snake, I'm not going to have it so that the snake dies when it runs into itself. This is going to be a bit of a kind of like a bit of a parody where it's kind of like, there we go, so it can just go through itself, no problem. What's going to happen is I haven't done anything over the borders as well, so that's something I'm going to do next. You're going to be able to wrap around to the edges, and basically you cannot die. So the idea of the game is that you can just keep collecting gold and endlessly. I'm going to have gold appearing in like a big pile on the left. That's why I've got the arena over on the right hand side. And the idea is that the snake after a while is going to realize that this endless pursuit of money and growth is a little bit pointless. So that's kind of like my twist on the game. But anyway, I'm so glad that I've managed to get all of this working now. It's taken quite a lot of effort. I've had to kind of like step away from it a few times and kind of just like rethink everything I was doing. So I'm now going to go through and explain how all the code works. So what I've got in here, this scriptable object, what I realized for things like the tail is that it was easier to just have a separate sprite for each type, for each direction that the tail was moving in. So I've literally got a tail down, left, right and up. And the reason for that is because Unity has a little bit of a strange quirk whereby you cannot rotate the position of the sprite as on its own independently of the direction in which it's going. So if the transform of the object is pointing upwards, you cannot rotate the sprite to point left and still move right. If you do a rotation on the transform, so as I'm doing on the actual snake head object, I rotate the transform, that adjusts both the direction of the sprite and the direction of the movement. You can't move them independently. That's what I realized. And so that's why I've put those individual parts here on the scriptable object, and then as before I've got the corner objects. So the main part of what I've had to do is in this segment class. So this was empty last time. So the main thing that's important here is that it's keeping track of the previous direction and previous position. And one of the things that I've had to kind of figure out is that obviously the snake head is still a segment, And so I had to, the head has to move first because all of the other body parts follow it. So I've got on here move head. I'm going to talk about the grow in a minute. So it moves the head first and then it moves the segments. So what I've done here is I've had to put in a separate method on the segment class to move the head because it works a little bit differently. And so I've got a move head, and it's got all of the, it keeps track of all the various directions there. And the head is moved according to a direction which is passed in. So this is what's different about it, because the direction that the head is moving in, it's obviously based on what the player does, and that's here. See, when the player presses a key, this is where we set the new direction. And so that only happens on the snake class, that only happens on the head. All of the other segments of the snake, they're just following the segment in front. And what I also had to do here was change the way the positioning worked based on whether or not we're following the head. Because if we're following the head segment, then the current position is actually kind of one behind it. So you have to go to the previous position of that head. Whereas if you're following just any of the other segments, you just want to grab that position. And this was something that stumped me for ages, trying to get all of this correct. I had to kind of like debug step by step by step, and that's why I've got so many of these debug log statements all over the place. Now for the sprite selection, that actually wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be. Once I was keeping track of the position and the direction correctly, then the rest of the sprite stuff just kind of fell into place. So over here I've got a simple check to see if it's the tail segment, which is basically if we're the last one. So I pass in here when I do this just the index that we're currently on and then the highest number. So if we're on the last one, we know that we're on the tail. And then so when we select a sprite, if we're on the tail segment, we select a tail sprite. And then what I'm doing here is saying, okay, well, let's look at the current direction and the previous direction. If the direction has changed, if it's the same rather, then it's just one of the body sprites. There's only two of those. It's either going vertical or it's going horizontal. Otherwise, it's one of the corner sprites. So for the tail, it simply checks what the direction is and it just picks the sprite out of those four. For the body sprite, this one's even easier. If it's either going right or left, then it's taking the horizontal body sprite. If it's going up or down, it's taking the vertical body sprite. The corner one was a little bit longer, but it's still, the way I've done this is probably isn't particularly efficient or not particularly elegant, but at least it's easy for me to read. So if we're going up and right, then the sprite is going to be upright, but then that also works kind of inverted as well. So upright is the same as if we were going how do I put this, right and then down, no, left and down, yeah. So left and down would be using that same sprite. So basically I've just put in the conditions for all of the sprites, and that just allows it to pick the correct one out of this list here. Now one thing with the way that the snake grows, what I've realized is that the trigger, I couldn't do the grow directly in here. It just didn't kind of work properly. So I think I've still got a little bit of a bug. So what I've done instead is I've just set a flag to say, okay, we're going to grow on the next tick. Because the way I want it is that if you run over a piece of gold, what I didn't want is I don't want the growth immediately. I want it to be on the next tick. So it kind of it's eating the gold. If I put that as just like 1.0, I want it to eat the piece of gold. And then as a result of that, so if I come across to here, it's going slow now. I want it to grow when the head comes here. So it's eating it and then it grows. And that's what I wanted. And so I've done that via this grow next tick. Yeah. And so then what I'm doing here is in my actual grow function, I'm saying, okay, has that flag been set? If so, then we're going to add a new signal, and then it sets it, add a new segment, and then it sets that flag to false. But it means that this part doesn't work. So it's not the end of the world. I can start it off with just a head and it works perfectly fine. So at this point, so I don't even know if I mentioned this is a game for a jam. It's currently Monday. Jam is up on Friday, so I kind of want to get on now that I've got this movement working. I want to do the next part, so I'll come back to this, but the next part I'm going to do is over on the left hand side of the screen, I'm going to start drawing piles of money accumulating, basically big piles of coins, as the snake goes around eating the pots of gold. I fixed the problem where I wasn't able to do the starting size. So what I've done, if I just show it now, I've made it start on the edge and then it will start with 3. So the reason I wasn't doing it before is because I was trying to grow on the following tick, and the reason for that was because for some reason, well, I say for some reason, it was always starting up here, and it was quite simply because the prefab, the transform, by default it starts off as 0. So when it is first drawn, it was being rendered in this spot over here, which is what I don't want. So all I've done here is I've just put it just miles off the scene, so you can never actually see it, and then on the following tick, when the actual segment takes over and sorts out all of the positions, it just fixes itself. So that was just a really simple little fix there, and I've just changed it so that it enters right on the edge, so it looks like it's kind of coming into it. At some point I might change the graphics so that this kind of arena has got a sort of a border, but at the same time I kind of want to have it as a wraparound, so I'm not really sure how I'm going to do that, but yeah, I think that works better now. I've made a change now to handle the boundaries of the arena. So what I want is that the snake, it can't die, basically. So this is kind of different from the normal snake. So when it hits the wall, I want it to just stop. So in any direction, it can keep moving, it can keep grabbing stuff, but if it hits any of the walls, it will just stop, and then it can't go back on itself. So you've got to turn it either sort of left or right. And similarly, it doesn't die by bumping into its own tail, so it's just going to keep going forever. So this just keeps it within the arena, and just keeps it in play, which is what I want. And eventually the snake is going to realize the futility of continuing to grow and gain money. But this was quite easy to implement. All I had to do here was pass in the arena object, which I already had set up for offsetting, where the whole kind of game is rendered. So I've already got a bounding rectangle for that. So all I needed to do in my snake class is when I move the head, just pass in the arena object, and I'm now returning a ball to say whether or not the head was moved. So this will just do a simple check, can we move in the direction? And this is very simple. It's just a case of, if we're on the left side of the arena and we're moving left, then we can't move. If we're on the right side and we're moving right, and so on. So this just then returns a ball, just give me a little debug log. And then for the snake class, it's only going to try to move the segments if the head is actually moved. We don't want the segments all collapsing into themselves. So that was a pretty simple change. So now I've got the movement kind of restricted to this area. So what I want to do next is have some kind of visual feedback for the actual gold collection. So what I've done now is I've put this bowl on the side, and then when you collect some gold, it will actually drop some gold coins in there. I've also reduced the number of pots which are on the screen at once, as it was all starting to fill up quite quickly. Now obviously the graphic isn't perfect because it doesn't actually, it's just a sprite at the end of the day. So I'll show in a minute how that's done. So it doesn't look perfect, but it's good enough. This is just going to be a little game jam game. And so I'm just using the physics engine here to just drop in those gold coins. And what happens is eventually it will start to fill up, and then it will begin to overflow, and some of the coins kind of just spill off, and they just basically just drop off the edge of the screen. And I don't mind that. I think that looks okay, because it's kind of the point of the game is that you start to accumulate so much that there is too much of it. That's kind of the point. So I'll just keep playing this for a bit, just to kind of, you can start to see now that they're beginning to kind of drop off the edge of the screen, and they just disappear into nothingness, and I think that's okay. Now I might actually move that bowl down because I want some space to kind of put in like little thoughts that the snake is thinking. So that's the next thing I'm going to do is put in, actually I might work on something slightly different, but yeah, so this is the kind of the basic idea, is that the snake just keeps getting bigger. you keep getting more money, but there's never any end to it. You can't die, and it just goes on and on and on. And then I want a second part of the game where it's almost like there's an escape from this endless growth, endless consumption. I hope the game doesn't come across as preachy or anything. It's just supposed to be a little bit of fun. But yeah, so that's my mechanic for the gold. I think, yeah, so now we can see it overflowing. I think that actually looks quite cool. So I'm quite pleased with how that looks. Yeah. So in order to implement that, it was pretty simple. So the coin is literally just a little pixel coin, and it's got a rigid body. So I'm just using the built-in physics. The bowl, I've got just a polygon collider on it. And then if I just zoom in a little bit on that, so it has kind of the shape of the bottom part of the bowl, which allows the coins to kind of collect there, and that's all it needs. There's no the only code for it actually is I was already responding to the event on gold collected. So what that does now is it just does an extra little thing here of drop gold coins. That starts up a coroutine because it just drops a few every few seconds. There's a slight variation on the spawn point there, and that's all it does. And it just literally just drops that coin, wrong one, drops that coin and lets the physics engine handle it all. So I think that works out pretty well. One thing I've done now is added some extra objects around the outside of the arena to give it a border. So this particular pack came as like a sprite sheet. Now, ideally, I would do this with like the tile grid map thing. The fact that I don't know the name of it just goes to show I don't know how to do that yet. So I've literally just dragged in sprites and then positioned them. So that was a little bit of a pain in the butt, but you know, it looks okay. I think this looks quite decent now. So that's kind of just giving an edge to the arena. But what I want to do now is I also want to have a few UI elements. And one of the problems I've always had with every game is trying to get art assets which match up. And I couldn't find any assets which were kind of on the same sort of art style as this one. The creator that did this pack unfortunately hasn't done any kind of GUI. So what I've done is I've tried to create my own. So this is the original sprite sheet, which has got all of the various blocks in it. And then what I have done is I've created a 96 by 96 using the same colors, sort of, and then I've made some edits. So this is my first attempt at any kind of pixel art. And if I put that in the sort of like the base size, I think it looks okay-ish, but I'm not going to know until it goes in the game. So what I've done is I've put it in here, and then in the sprite, oh no, not that one, this one here, I've then 9-sliced it. So I'm hoping I should be able to use this as part of the UI to form, I want kind of like a text box to appear, because I want some text elements on the screen as well. So I want just, yeah, a UI which is going to be on those same kind of colors. So I'll see how it looks in the game when I put the UI in. What I've done now is to put in a UI, and I've got a UI image here which is used as the back of this panel. So I think it looks reasonable. It's not brilliant, but it will do. I've just got some random text in there. I've just got a pixel font, and what the idea is that every few pots of gold that the snake picks up, it's going to kind of show a thought. If I just play the game, it'll be easier to actually show it. So at the start of the game, I've moved the bowl down a little bit. The first pot of gold, it's like ooh, and then every few pots that are collected, a new thought will pop up. I think it's the next one. There we go. And so I'm kind of like telling a little story just through a simple UI. So if I come back, the way I've done this is really simple. I've just done a scriptable object, which has simply got, where is my scriptable object? Nothing but just a list of strings. And then in here, I'm probably going to add quite a bit more to this, but the idea is that it just tells this kind of story. Now for the fading in, I've done this through coroutines. So This is something I hadn't done before. So to the thought panel, I've added something called a canvas group, and I've started it off with an alpha value of 0. The nice thing about this is as you manipulate the alpha, it also applies to all of the elements. So yes, you can see here it's applying it to the text as well. So I start it off being 0, and then what I do in my game manager, I've just done, where have I added it? Over here we collect the gold, and I've now got another method in here called think about gold. And then what that's doing is, if it's like, I've defined it as being 4 pots. If you collect 4 pots, it will pop up another thought. So it just grabs the next one out of the scriptable object, and then it invokes a new, I've forgotten what these are called, events. New events, and that is picked up by my HUD class. I've got a HUD controller here. This is what I had in Astroworld, same kind of thing. So what I'm doing here is on this display thought, it's just through coroutines. So the do display thought, that's fading in the panel, and then it's waiting for a few seconds, and then it's fading out the panel. The actual fade, what that's doing is it's just doing a lerp from the initial alpha value of the canvas group over to the end value, and then the end value is defined either 1 or 0 depending on whether we're fading in or out. So this is definitely the kind of thing I could use again. I can imagine myself doing this in future games, so I might want to break this out into its own little script at some point, into its own little component, but I'm not going to worry about it now. You know, this game jam ends tomorrow actually, and I'm nowhere near finished with the game. So yeah, so that's all I've got at the moment. And the idea is that at a certain point, I want to kind of set it up so that the end of the messages start to change in tone around the kind of time that the gold is overflowing over the bowl. So if I'm just going to pause for a moment, I'll just play this through for a little. Actually, I can't, because it will crash because I haven't coded in the rest of the messages. But the idea is, if I pause it, this is eventually, this bowl is going to fill up, and then it's going to start overflowing and falling off onto the edge of over to the edge of the screen. And then I kind of want to trigger like a scene transition, and I'm going to go into the second part of the game where I'm going to give the snake a choice. Does the snake want to carry on just collecting gold endlessly, or does he actually want to escape the gold cave and go and carry on living his life? I've just made a slight change. Instead of having this thought displayed after every certain number of pots collected, I've just done it on a timer instead. So I'm doing it every where have I put it, every 10 seconds. The reason being, if there were several pots of gold close together, sometimes it could overlap. So every 10 seconds it displays a new one. The whole thing takes 5 seconds. So it fades in over 1, displays it for 3, it fades out over 1, and then there'll be a 5-second pause, and then it displays another one. So the whole thing at the moment, as I've got it, it's going to be about 4 minutes to get to the end of that sequence, and then I want to trigger kind of like the next part of the game. I'm on craft picks here, and what I was looking for was kind of a background that I can use for like the intro sequence. So I've got this this one here, and I think this will work quite well. So what I've done is I wanted to use this area of rock to put in a cave. So I have used my wonderful pixel art skills to draw this this cave, and I already had the gold sprite, because this is the gold image that I've been using to get that little gold coin, which is what drops down into the bowl. So I've just grabbed this one here, thrown that in there, and then I've put it in the game as like an intro scene. I've got this kind of animated snake. I don't yet know how to do animation, so I have to go and learn about that. And what I want is just basically the snake is slithering along, and then he finds the cave, and that's what starts the game. And then afterwards, when he gets to the end of that sequence, the existential crisis, when he realizes he's just collecting gold forever, I then want to kind of code to like another sequence where he suddenly sees this part and there's no cave, and he's like, oh, you know, was it real, blah blah blah. So yeah, so that's kind of what I'm trying to do next. I now have a little tiny intro sequence, but it was an absolute bitch to get working because of a silly little problem. So here's my snake. and he just moves along to there, and then he stops. And so then what I want to do next is then have some kind of pop-ups, like a UI with just a like, oh, what's this cave kind of thing, which leads into the main game. So my problem was the animation. When I first did this animation, I've kind of like dragged it into the scene and it automatically creates it for you. But when I was rendering it, it just flickered. It just had all of these seemingly blank frames. Anyway, after lots of searching, I basically found out that the problem is with the sorting layers. When you have a background image, it needs to be on a different layer. So the snake, I've had to put that in order in layer 1. So apparently what happens is, I don't know why, but certain frames of the animation will actually render behind the background image, which gives it the look as if it's missing frames, as if it's dropping frames. I was like looking at my sprites, all of this in here, making sure that I had all of this set up correctly. I was just going over and over it, thinking there's no blank frames in here. I was checking all of the animation thing in here, making sure this was all correct, and oh, it's driving me nuts. So it took me forever to fix that up. So there you go, just order in layer. Okay, so that's the next part done. A little bit of refactoring on the fading. So what I've done first of all is I've put it into its own class as just a static method, which can be called elsewhere, because I'm going to be using this thing again. And then I've replaced the lerp with something a little bit different. So I'm setting the alpha directly on the canvas group, but the way I'm doing it is that it kind of eases in the amount based on whether we're fading in or fading out. So when we're fading in, it does it more slowly at the beginning, and the reason for that is that I noticed that when I was first doing this, I noticed that it seemed to fade in more quickly than it faded out, and it took me a while to figure this out. I can just leave the snake over there and the text will just pop up, and the reason is it's actually more of a visual perception. At first I thought it was setting the alpha values incorrectly, but it's not. It's that when it's nearly opaque, it looks opaque. It looks like it's already faded in, so it's just given the impression that it was fading in more quickly, but it wasn't. So that doing it this way, it kind of, I think it looks better. It's only subtle, but it's there. I might still tweak those values a little bit more, but now I can reuse this in other parts of the game, so in other scenes. I've made another small refactor. So it occurred to me that my list of thoughts, which the snake has in the cave, is really nothing but a list of strings, and I'm going to want the same thing in my other scenes. So rather than calling it a scriptable object of thoughts, I've just literally changed it to a string list. When I say changed, you can't actually refactor the scriptable objects, annoyingly, so I had to create a new class, which I've now put in like the root directory. I've organized my scripts into folders according to the scene, but for things that aren't scene specific, I've put them outside. So I've got that string list out here, and then I just had to create a second scriptable object here. So I just copied over the strings from the other object and I've deleted the first one. So now I can create another one of these. So I want to create another scriptable object here based on my string list, but this is going to be intro strings. And then I'm going to have something similar in another scene as well, I think. So yeah, that just allows me to reuse the same class. I realise I'm spending an awful lot of time on message panels here, but I've just refactored all of this again. I've realised I can just put all of this code into one class and then I can reuse it across different scenes. So what I've done now is I've got rid of that UI toys, which was the static class that had a static helper, and I've just put everything into a UI message panel class, and that is attached to an actual panel object. So that's got the panel script here, and then there's a few serialized fields. So what it needs is the scriptable object of the string list. So that's just the list of strings which are going to be displayed on that particular panel. I can set in here how long to display its message, how long the fade is, and whether or not it should loop them at the end. So on the awake, it just grabs the actual canvas group. So this panel, it needs to have a canvas group component, because that is what controls the alpha. So that's what allows the fading to be done. And then I've got one single public method, which is display next message. That's just grabbing the next string out of that scriptable object. If it's at the end, then depending on whether or not we're looping, it's going to either go back to the beginning or it's just going to keep displaying the last one. And then all of the coroutine stuff and the fading is now done on this class. This is all private. And so what that means is that my actual UI class, because at the moment in the main game, this is the only that text panel is the only thing on the UI. I don't have any kind of like scoring or anything else. It's a really simple UI. So this is all it needs. All it needs is the component for that message panel. It grabs it in the awake. Now this part here, this is where it's responding from the game manager. So the game manager was previously controlling the messages that were displayed. It doesn't do that anymore. All it does is it fires an event. That's it. Doesn't do anything with it. And then that event is reacted to here, and all that does is it tells the panel to display the next message in the sequence, and it just works. So that is much more self-contained. So now this just works as it does before. I'm just going to stop that snake moving, and next one will come in. She says, oh, I've broken it. Oh my god, here we go. Oh no, there we go. Oh, I think I changed the durations a bit, and made it a bit slower. So yeah, now on my UI class, so I've got another scene here, which is what I'm doing, and this is exactly what I want. I've got another UI object, and I've got another panel. So now I can put in that panel script. I can do things as before, but just give it now a different scriptable object. So I haven't put the code for this yet, but again, it's going to be very simple, and then it should just work for the intro. I've made yet another change to this panel, and then I'm absolutely leaving this bloody thing alone. Okay, so what I realized was that I wanted, if I'm on the last message, I don't want it to fade out. I want it to stay there. And so finally, I've managed to tweak all the various little timings, the timing of the state movement and the messages and blah blah, and I now have an intro sequence that actually works. So it's nice and short, which works for a jam. So we just have the snake moving along the side, few messages displayed showing he's a little bit dissatisfied by life, and then when he gets near the end, he discovers the cave. So then I'm just going to pause here for a few seconds to make sure that's loaded, and then down here, there we go, ready to locate scene. So I need to make that probably a couple of seconds shorter, and then at that point I can transition into the main part of the game. I haven't been able to record anything for a few hours as I was just running out of time for the jam. So this is basically my last kind of scene, and what I wanted to do for this is that the snake exits the cave and then he goes into kind of like a choose your own adventure type thing. That's what I had my idea for at the beginning of the game. I just ran out of time. I just did not have time to do a choose your own adventure. So instead, all I have is basically just a little story, which is just told with a few pictures and a bit of text. So I'll explain how this is put together. So I'm going to carry on working on it. So at the end here is literally just shows a credit screen, and this is literally just a quick picture that I threw up together in Canva. So it's bad. There's no audio, there's no polish, nothing. It's very rough. It's kind of sad actually. For some reason this jam was just not popular, so the deadline has just gone, and there's only 8 games. This is my one, Endless Coil. So yeah, so basically this third scene, I'd called it choices because the idea is going to be at each kind of node you would have a choice of other things that you could do. As I said, I didn't have time. So all it does is I've got another scriptable object here for a choice node, and so it has the main narrative text, it has a background image, there's an animated snake on it, so I set kind of where it's going to finish and how fast it goes. And then I did have a list of choice nodes, and the idea was that was going to allow it to kind of go into this whole choose your own adventure. That ended up just didn't use that. So in the actual game, I've only got these 4 choices. So that's basically just the text and an image. That's all it does. And then I've just got on the UI, I've just got a continue button. And what that does is it just calls change a node on the choices controller, which is what controls this scene. So the choices controller, all that does is it calls update scene. So it's got a list of the choices available. And for update scene, it just grabs the current choice. It sets the movement of the snake. So for that snake, actually, this was the same snake that I had in my intro scene. And what I did there is I just added a public method there to allow me to basically change the variables so I could change the speed and the target. So on the intro scene, the snake kind of poodles along very slowly, but on those final scenes, he's going much faster. It's like he's feeling better kind of thing. What I'm doing there is, where am I? Not that one. Update scene. Sorry, yeah. So I modify the movement, change the background image, and change the text. Now, when I change the node, that increments the index. If we're on the last one, then it's going to load up the credits image, and it just disables the UI basically. And so that allows me to just quickly hack together that kind of credit screen. And then for the main game, for the transition between the main game and this final scene, where am I? In the game manager here, all I did was, again, it's just kind of a bit of a quick hack, but I've just put in a timer. So basically all of those thoughts come up every 12 seconds, and I've timed it. You've got just under 5 minutes of gameplay in that gold cave, and then the last thought that the snake has, is that help screen. And then because of that work I did on the UI panel where the last one stays there and doesn't fade out, basically this help just stays there for a little bit longer, and then it literally just loads to the next scene. So what I want to do is, I'm not going to abandon this game like I did with Asterworlds. I do want to do some more things. So what I think would be better, actually, what I'd quite like to do is perhaps put in another object which represents like a gate, an exit, and have that appear at this time. So rather than just load the next scene, have an exit on there and then have a collider on there. And then if the player notices it and goes through the exit, that then triggers the next scene. So I think that would be much better. So some other things that need to be done. Obviously the game needs sound. I've got no sound effects, no music. And then I would want like a title screen with the settings to be able to do that. I want some particle effects as well. So yeah, I found all of these various particle effects and they're all pixel. And now that I know how to do a little bit of animation, I'm sure there'd be something in there that'd be I could use for when like hitting the pot of gold or something like that. Just it just needs a little something. And then obviously some sound effects. It's going to need like the sound effects for when the coins drop in there, maybe for sound effects as the snake's moving around. It just needs a bit more. And I'm not sure about the choose your own adventure. It would be good to do that, because as it is, it's not really much of a game. It's just showing 4 bits of text really. So it's not quite what I wanted. And I think from a programming point of view, it'd be quite fun to kind of have a choose your own adventure thing. So yeah, I do want to do a little bit more with it after the jam. But this is it for now. So this is the version that has been submitted. But yeah, it's not going to take long to review these because there's only 8 games and one of them is mine, so it's only 7. So now I'm going to start doing some edits to the game after the jam. So I'm going to create a new project on it so I can carry on working on it and at least get it into a state where I feel like it's finished. So one thing I wanted to do is put in a title screen, and I think I'm going to get rid of the credits at the end. So what I've done here is I've just got a title screen which I've mainly done in Canva. So that's just the image there, and then all I've got on here is I put our little friend the snake, just a static image. He's not going to move in this one. I've got a single button which is start game, and then I've just got one empty object, title controller, with literally one line of code, which I've got a public function, load the intro scene, and it loads it, and that is of course hooked up to the start button over here. So that is super simple, but it just means that the player isn't immediately going straight into the intro if they weren't ready for it. So that also shows that there's going to be more to it. It shows that it's going to be a snake game, and it tells you this WASD. And then you just press that button, and then it just goes straight into the intro scene. So just a little tweak there to make that better. I've made a similar tweak to the intro scene. I've decided rather than just immediately loading the scene when the timer expires, I thought I'd put it on a button instead. So what I've done is I've just put a button down here, and it will start off as being inactive, and then when the timer hits, it just makes the button active, and then the button triggers this, which is the scene transition. So I think that just, again, it just gives the player just that little bit more control, because I don't want them to miss what's happening if they weren't looking at the screen at the moment where the scene transition hits. So I'd rather they have kind of control over it. So this part is all as normal, and then down here, as he gets to the cave, here we go, the button is there. I could do moving it up just a touch, and then that doesn't work. Okay, so once I've fixed that, it will then load the next scene. So I've had an idea about the scene transition, or not so much the scene transition, but the way the cave exits this cave. So at the moment we've got all these walls here which are blocking him in, and he can't exit. So what I was thinking was it might be nice if towards the end, once he reaches that end point, if all of those walls would then dissolve, and then the snake could just fly off the edge of the screen. And so I found these effects, and I thought this one here might be quite nice. So I've imported in the sprite sheet, I've set it up, and I've got in one particular part of animation. So I've got the animation here. It's a bit hard to see in there, but if I play the game full, I've put it right above the bottom corner there. And then what I need to do is kind of work out where it goes. The way I'd kind of like to do it is I've got the arena borders just set up as all these objects. Now, when I was building that, I was thinking, oh, it's a bit shit. I should probably draw this in a graphics program. But in actual fact, it might work to my advantage, because each one is an individual sprite, which means I can get rid of it. So I could have a little sequence whereby I randomly start picking the walls, and then it disappears and gets replaced by that fade animation. But the tricky part is figuring out where to put it, what the position of the transform is, because the problem with these sprites is that they're all kind of aligned in a slightly different way. So if I click on some of these, it's not hard to see, it's not easy to see them, but basically 0, 0 of the sprite wouldn't give me the center of the image, and that's the problem. So what I've done instead is I'm going to start working on a script which will try to control it, and I've figured out what the positions are, if it's on the X on the left hand wall, the right hand wall, the top hand wall, or the bottom hand wall, and I've just figured that out by just manually placing it in the scene. So I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to do this, but I'm kind of starting to form the idea in my head. So what I'm going to want to do is save this as a prefab. So I've got the wall script on it. I'm going to want to save that as a prefab, and then when I'm triggering off the disappearing, I want to take one of the blocks, get rid of it, and replace it with that fade animation. And then if I can get that working, I would then want to do it for all of them, and just gradually have the walls as basically disappearing. So I'll try to do it for one block and see how I go from there. I've got it working. It was actually a lot easier than I thought it was going to be. So I've just triggered it to go at the beginning of the scenes. As soon as I hit play, all the walls are going to dissolve, and there they go. Now I think that looks pretty decent. Now at the moment, the snake is still confined to the arena, so obviously I'll need to put something in to do that. But I think in terms of the visual effect, I think that looks a lot better than just loading the next screen. Yeah, so I like that. It's all about the positioning, really. So what what I figured out was that if I just put like a basic object in my scene, just like a square sprite, okay, you can't really see it at the moment. If I put it right on over here, sort of in the middle of the wall, then I can see it's sort of at this certain position. If I put it here, that's kind of like the middle position. So if I put it, if it's somewhere over here, then I know that it's further towards the left than anything else. Therefore, it has to kind of be a left wall piece. And it's the same for all of them. So what I've done is I've just defined these thresholds. So if it's less than 4, then it's got to be part of the left wall. If it's greater than my threshold of 12 there, then it has to be part of the right wall, and so on. And this also works for the corner pieces because they're going to be both, you know, like a left and the top, or like the top and the right, for example. So this is just really simple. It's just a few if statements. Now, this is not elegant. One of the problems with all of this is it's very much hard coded. You know, at this point in the game, if I wanted to move this arena to somewhere else in the game, if I wanted to just change its position, the entire game would break. So that's one thing to bear in mind, is that, you know, this is completely coupled to the way this is physically positioned on the screen, and so are these. Actually, every one of these had to be very manually positioned, and that took me a little while to go through and do all of those. It will do for now. It's not like I need to be moving arenas all over the place, so it doesn't really matter. Now, these are all static because these values, you know, it's not per instance. So the way that it's actually done is in my game manager, I start off a coroutine at the beginning, which is dissolve walls. Now, obviously, I'm not going to have it in the start function. I'm going to have it at that scene duration. So where I had it before, instead of this loading the scene, I would then trigger off the dissolving walls, and then I would allow the snake to escape. Obviously, I have to code that next. But the actual dissolving of the walls is really pretty simple. So I'm giving my game manager the arena borders object here, and this has just basically got all of those individual wall pieces inside of it. So it just goes through and it grabs them, and it grabs the position currently. And then I'm calling that static function for get adjusted position. So this is calling this one here. This is a static. So that's just going to shift those positions to make sure that it's right on one of those walls. So this is the position for the animation to play, for that little kind of like poof type animation. And then I'm just putting it in a coroutine, so there's a slight delay, so they just go off one at a time. It's a little bit random just to make it just look a little bit nicer. Now, for the actual object itself, obviously I'm instantiating a new game object for each one of these, so I don't want them to hang around, and so on the start function it just destroys it after 1 second. So yeah, it's actually, I think that looks pretty decent. I quite like that. So the next thing I would need to do, of course, is now code for the snake to allow it to then keep going beyond the borders. And then what I would do is have it so that once it had got, you know, like a few, I'd probably put some colliders around or something like that, and say, you know, kind of to indicate that the snake has left the arena, has left the cave, and then transition to the next scene. Right, I've refactored this slightly, so I've put the code for this on the actual arena class because that makes more sense, and then I have got a public method there to dissolve the walls, and then that is invoked by the game manager. So what I've also got in here is I'm just setting up a boolean to say whether or not the snake is allowed to escape from the arena, and of course that starts off as being false. He's not allowed to escape, he's got to stay in there. And so I can use this ball in 2 places. So in the game manager, I've changed the naming as well. So instead of like the scene, timer and duration, I've called it like a trapped duration, which is just 10 seconds for testing. Let me put that for 5 actually, while I just test this out. And then an escape timer. And then if they're not already allowed to escape, then it will trigger off the dissolve walls. So then when the snake is moving, on the segment class, I've got a method already which determines whether or not the snake is allowed to move. And what it does is it's checking for the arena bounding rectangle to see if it is confined. So if if this flag has been set to say that the player is allowed to escape, then I just return true, which means he can keep on moving. So what I do now is for the first 5 seconds, if I go downwards, he's confined here. Once those walls start to dissolve, there he goes, off he goes. And then what I can do is I can have maybe a collider around each of these areas, and then when he hits those colliders, that is what would then trigger the next scene. Okay, I didn't need to mess around with colliders at all. It's actually a lot simpler than that. So I'll just show how it works first of all, and then I'll show how it's done. So I'm just going around in the cave. It will disintegrate after 5 seconds. So now I can escape. I'm just going to go this way over on the left. It's a little bit easier to see. As soon as he gets to 3 points, there we go. We got the scene transition. So the way that was done, I didn't need to do a collider. Instead, I just created another rectangle. So the arena already defines a bounding rectangle, and then so I've just done another one called an escape rectangle, which is just a little bit bigger, just 2 squares bigger than the main arena. And then I have got a little function on there which is called has escaped, and it just checks to see whether a position which is passed in is within that escape rectangle. So then on the snake class, when I'm doing the movement, what I can do is once the head has been moved, I can then ask the arena, has the snake escaped? If it has, it then raises an event. So I've called it on escaped arena, and then that event is listened to by the game manager, and then this is where it loads the next scene. I've still got this scene is still called choices at the moment because it's supposed to be a choose your own adventure. It isn't, it's a story really. So yes, I think that now I'm really happy with that. That is a much nicer way to change it. So what I'll need to do, of course, is change this back to the 270 seconds, not 5, and test the timings and see how that all works out. I just did a build of the game and tried to run it from the browser, and what I noted was that the UI background images were all kind of messed up. So what I've had to do is basically change all of the background images so that they are actually UI images and not scene images, so that they scale properly. And I've had to make sure that the canvas is set to scale with screen size, and on some of them, I think it was the intro one, I had that missed. Now for the story, which is like, I've called it choices here, but it's actually just the story thing. This was a little bit trickier because this combines a background image, but it's also got a scene object, which is my animated snake. So what I've had to do here is I've had to change the UI for the render mode for the canvas. Usually it's in screen space overlay. So I've had to change that to screen space camera, drag my main camera into it, and then what I've done is I've added in another sorting layer, and I've put the background right at the back. And then on my snake, I've given that the sorting layer of the snake head, and so that makes sure that the animated snake will still render on top of the background, and this background is now a UI image, which means that it will scale so I can have it in like a different kind of that's slightly off still there. It works a lot better now, so it might not be perfect, but that will certainly do for now. It's a lot better than it was. So today I have been doing quite a bit of work on the audio because there wasn't any, and I've also done a little bit of refactoring. I've renamed my scene, the choices scene, to story, and I've still got a little bit more renaming in there. But yeah, the audio. So I didn't have any audio in the game when I submitted it to the jam, and obviously all games need audio. But it's one of these things that I've been kind of struggling a little bit in my previous games. So I've done 2 Unity games, Toasty Tumble and Asterworlds, and when I did Asterworlds, what I was starting, this is the Asterworlds project, what I was starting to try to do was make use of scriptable objects to store data about the objects within the game, and then have the actual behavior stored in the script. So for example, this is the ship, and this has got the sound effects in it. So on the scriptable object, this is where I would kind of set which sound effects to use for the various things. But the problem was, in my actual code for the audio manager class, I don't know what I was thinking here. So I had some kind of generic stuff here for like fading in the music and doing the volume settings and everything using the player prefs. But then I was hard coding all of the game related audio stuff into this class, which means I couldn't use it for any other game. So the audio manager knows, okay, when a bullet's been fired, we need to play the shoot sound effect. And that's no good at all. What I want to do is start building kind of like little reusable components that are going to be used on any game. And so audio management is one of those things. I'm going to need an audio manager in every single game I create. It's going to want music tracks. I'm going to want sound effects. Some of them are going to be looping. Some of them are normal ones. So what I've done is I've created this audio manager. Now, you can see it's in blue here. What I've done is I've made it into a prefab. And so I actually don't need it in this scene. And I'll show you that in a minute. So I've got my sources set up. This is as before, and then the code is very, very similar, except the way that the instance is managed. So this is a singleton class. Now, I don't often use singletons, but for something like an audio manager, it's really useful. Now, I've only got the generic stuff on here, like the fade-in and stuff. It's got nothing game specific. So this could simply be copied into any other game. But here's what's really cool. So first of all, let me just show you a little bit of how it works. If I was starting, I've got 4 scenes in my game. So within the Unity editor, obviously you can only have, you'd only really load it, sort of play it from one particular scene. So if I start from the title screen, this is starting to play this title track that I've got in here. When I press start, it's going to start loading the next scene. It's loaded in the next music track. So what I've got on here is each of the controllers for each scene. So each scene has got its own controller. So say the intro controller there. In fact, this is the only thing it does. I've put the clip on the controller itself. I don't see the need to have a data class when this is literally the only piece of data there is. And then all it's doing is it's calling the instance on the audio manager and fading in the track. But here's the problem. With Unity, let's say I want to test something on the gold cave, which I do because I've just put in some new functionality in there. I want the music to be able to play. And what was happening is I had the audio manager right here in the title screen, and because it's a singleton, it creates itself at the beginning. But if I unload this, now my audio manager doesn't exist. And the problem was, if I then ran the game from within Unity in here, it would crash. So what I've done instead, by making it into a prefab, and in here, so what I've had to do also is, rather than just store it in the prefabs directory, I've had to put it in a special directory called resources. So this is a little Unity quirk which I didn't know about before, and you can literally call resources.load, give it a type and a name, and it will dynamically load that prefab on the fly, and then I can instantiate it. And this is just so useful, because now this means I can press play just on my gold cave. I don't need to load either of my previous scenes, and I've got another track playing, which is the one for this scene. Now the thing I wanted to test on here actually is I put in a key press. If I just press, I know I'm going to tell you what key it is, special key, it will dissolve the walls so that I can then test the final scene. And here we go, we've got the music for this one. This particular piece of music, it reminds me of the old, what were they called, Secret of Monkey Island games. So this is just so useful. So this whole component, this audio manager, is not tied to the game at all, and I can drop this as it is, including the prefab, into any other game that I write from now on. So it's taking me a little bit of time to get that sorted. I didn't know about these resources before, but this is the kind of thing that I want to be spending my time on, because if I'm going to be making lots of games, I want to make sure that I'm not just repeating the same stuff over and over. I want to, put in these reusable components so that it just gets faster. So I'm really pleased with what I've done there. So now that I've got some music in the game, I want to start doing some sound effects. So I'm working on the main cave, and I've actually got two lots of sound effects in. So on the cave controller, I've just put in a clip here to actually when the snake hits the bag itself. But what I also wanted was for those coins, when they're dropping into that bowl, to make a sound whenever they do that. So what I've had to do here is add a little script onto the coin prefab, which is this. So at the moment, I was talking earlier about separating data from behavior, but because this is such a tiny game and there really isn't much in the way of data, I'm just putting the data on here. So I've got the clip, but I've had to put in some stuff here to kind of restrict how many times the audio can play. So for example, if I just take that out, play the, oops, what I've just done there. Play the clip on its own and comment this. And if I show you what it does, if I just click on Astroworlds, you'll see that it plays far too many times and then I start getting stuttering. So that's the sound effect for the bag. It's this part. So as it starts to drop those coins in the bowl, what's happening is every coin is hitting the other coins, which is causing those to move. And as this pile gets bigger and bigger and bigger, did you hear that stuttering? If I shut up a moment. Yeah, and it's even causing the music to stutter. Yeah, that's really bad. And the reason that's happening is that the collision, this is being triggered so many times. Because basically every time one of those coins hits anything else, I'm not even taking any notice of the actual collision object itself, it's going to call that. So I've got two things in here which are restricting it. One is the velocity of the coin itself. So I want it to come down as it's dropping into that bowl, but once the coins are already sitting in there, they'll just be kind of like shuffled around a little bit. So I don't necessarily want a sound effect for each tiny little shuffle. So I'm putting in a minimum velocity. And then I'm also putting in a cooldown. So that is sort of per object. So once it's already played a clink, it can't play another one within the next 0.2 seconds. Now I might need to tweak these a little bit more. I could probably put these up slightly more actually and see how that works out. I'd need to play with it some more. It's not perfect. I haven't done this before where the actual physics of an object is affecting the way the sound is played. That's something I hadn't done before. So I think it's better anyway, because you want the idea that, you know, the money is kind of like raining down, and after the player's been, there's a slight glitch there, after the player's been playing for a while, you know, you want there to have this feeling of there just being so much gold. It's like huge abundance of gold. So I'll try and get a few more. I think this might be not quite enough now. And I think maybe this sound is a little bit too loud in comparison to that one. Yeah. But that's what I've been working on there. I'll carry on tweaking it, but I think that's it brings the game to life a little bit more. I've added another animation now for when the gold pot is collected. So it's just like typical, miles away. Just quite a simple animation. It's from the same creator that did the other one that I did, the wall fade. So that's all that does, quite simple. I also experimented with adding sound effects for the snake kind of moving along. And I was trying to do that both in this main scene and also the other scenes where the story and the intro scene, and it didn't sound good. I just couldn't get anything to sound right, so I've decided just to leave that. So it can be a bit of a silent snake, and I think that's okay. I think I've got enough kind of sound effects. I don't really want to mess around with it too much. At this point, I've got the bulk of the game done. If you're wondering what I'm looking at here, I'm actually in my Asterworlds project. So what I want to do next is put in some sound settings for Endless Coil. But I want to be able again to sort of reuse what I've done. So in Asterworlds, this was a game that only had two scenes. It had the menu screen and then it had the actual game scene. And what I did here was I put just a little button, just a cog on the UI there, in order to bring up the settings. Now I can't actually run just the game scene from Asterworlds. If I try to run this, it will crash. Oh, why did it not crash? Why did it not crash? Okay, a moment ago it did crash because I didn't have the, where was it? Basically the audio manager instance. I wonder if it's because I've already run it and initialized that. But anyway, that's something I already solved with Endless Coil. But if I just run this from the main menu. So when you load in, you've got the settings panel here, and this brings up a little pop-up, which is the actual panel for the sound. And then if I play the game,
welcome aboard, Commander.
I've got this button here.
All controls are standard.
Just going to bring that,
ready for
turn her off. So this is the same panel, and the way that I'd done that was by making the actual, if I go on to, if I load both of those scenes, the HUD classes, I had made the actual panel itself, the settings panel, a prefab, and then I just had a different button. So this is exactly what I want to do with Endless Coil, and this is again the kind of thing that I want to be thinking about with my games going forward. The HUD in particular, I've called it over here a HUD on the game scene in Asterworlds, and this is something that kind of I've been thinking about with Endless Coil. Each scene is different and has got kind of a different UI. But it occurs to me that in other kinds of games, if I was doing something more complex, there might be certain areas of the game where I've got the same kind of UI across different scenes. And what I want for this game is to be able to have a button where you can control the sound settings from any of the scenes, because each one of the scenes in this game has got different music, different audio, and I want the user to be able to tweak that at any point. So they might, if I press play on here, it goes into the title scene initially. So we've got this particular music that plays. Now I could have a button on here to control the sound, and they might think, oh, the music is fine, and then they might click play on here, and then this music might be all right. Now again, that's kind of annoying. You have to go through the whole intro to get to the main game. But if I load up the main gold cave, the music in here is very different. It's kind of like this dark, ominous sounding music. And the player might get to here and think, well, I don't like this music. I want to turn that off. I mean, that's something that I would do. I don't particularly like the music that I've put in there, but of course I don't want to be repeating code and just repeating things all the time. I want to have reusable things. Now these errors on here coming up in the console, this is complaining about the fact that I don't have volume sliders for all of these different audio channels, because I haven't put that in yet. I haven't done any kind of audio settings, so it doesn't cause an error, it's just a warning. But yeah, this is what I want to be doing next, and having a consistent way of changing the volume settings from any point in the game, but have it so that I can reuse the component and just drop it into any scene. I've managed to do what I wanted to do with the audio, so I'm quite pleased with this. So this is the title screen. So I have a settings button on here now, and then what I have done is I have created a settings panel in the same kind of way as I did with Astroworld. So I'll just show you how that looks. So if I click on here, it's just got two pop-ups, all the way up, all the way down, somewhere in between. I don't actually have a sound effect on here, but that controls the other sound effects within the game. Click back, and that's all we've got. So we can just pop that up or down, and it saves it as well. Okay, so that's all fine. Now, in order to make the panel, this was quite simple. So I have an empty object for each one of the components. So I've got three different things on there. I've got the actual music slider, the sound effect slider, and the back button. What the back button does is I drag the parent in the panel, and I just have it basically turn off the panel. So it just turns itself off, which is all it needs. The individual volume sliders are the text parts and the slider itself. In terms of graphics, I thought I was going to have I was looking around for some UI, and I realized all I really needed to do was use the same sprites that I already had, which I'd already made earlier, which was like this plain sprite, and I've just literally created the panel itself, the button, the slider, and the handle. No, not the panel, but this part here, the handle, and the back button, they are all made using the exact same sprite. Because it's a sliced sprite, it just works well for a rectangular thing. So I think that works perfectly well. Like I did with Astroworlds, I have made that into a panel. So that solves half of the problem. The other problem was that, as I said, I wanted just a little button in other scenes. So if I load up my intro scene, get rid of the title for now. In my intro scene, if I just focus back in on the canvas and zoom over into the corner, I have created a little tiny button up here which pops up the same panel. But there it is in the corner. Same thing, it's the exact same panel from before. Again, all the settings are saved, so click on back and it just disappears. So what I've done now is I've made that into its own panel. Prefab. So the settings button, what this does is it's got the icon graphics. So I've just got an icon pack from a UI thing that I bought, and then it embeds the panel within itself. And so on the settings button, it does the exact same thing. It grabs the settings panel and it just, in this case, it turns it back on. And of course, the back button within that turns it back off. So what this means is I've now then made the button itself a prefab. It means that I can just drop it into another scene without having to do anything, and that's exactly what I want. So if I show that on my gold cave, just focus in on the HUD again, you can just about there we go, I've put it in the corner there. So let me show you how this works on the story, which is the one I haven't done it on yet. So if I load that in, so here's the gold cave, ominous music. I'm not a massive fan, so I would turn that right down on here, but same thing, so it's just dropped in. And so if I now load up my story, you can hardly hear the music because I've turned it down previously because it's all saved in the player settings. So all I need to do now is go up to my prefab, get my settings button prefab, drop it into my canvas, and that should be all I need. If I press play, boom, there we are. And that is a lovely reusable component. I could even drop that into another game and then just change the sprites. So that's exactly what I wanted, a nice reusable UI component. And I can probably do this kind of technique for other parts of the UI. This is exactly what I wanted. So just a simple little thing, but I'm happy with that. There's one last thing that was bugging me with the audio on this game, and that was the rather abrupt change in music from one scene to the next. So what I wanted to do was kind of like fade out one music track and be fading in the next one. Now Unity, on any particular audio source, it can only play one clip at a time. So what I tried to do at first was sort of like fade out one and then fade it in the next one sequentially, but I didn't really like that. So what I've done instead is I've changed my audio mixer so it's got two specific music tracks, 1 and 2, and then it basically flips between them. So I've got two ways of fading. So when the first where am I, on the very first scene, this was just something I put into test stuff. On the very first scene, all I want to do is fade in a single music track. I've only got one music track, there's nothing to fade out at that point. And so what I'm doing here is I've got a fade in music track, and I'm basically just keeping track of two different, I go up to the top, I'm just keeping references to two audio sources, the current one and the last one. So this is how you would do something like, keeping track of a position or a direction or something like that. It's quite a common thing. Now for this, I'm just using two of them, music one or music two. So the current one is going to be basically just flips whichever one it is. Now this will only work if I only have two audio sources. So if I had a more complicated game and I wanted to have several different tracks, if I had like various ambience or something, I would need to extend this, so it's like cycling through a list or something, but this is okay for now. And so a single music track, it just does a fade in. So for the fade, I've refactored this slightly, so I don't have a fade in and fade out. I've just got one simple fade, and it's just going from one volume to another. Is that how I've done that? No, that's just the fade in, sorry, ignore me. The important thing here is the crossfade. So what this is doing is it's taking a current track, and then it's getting the last music source, it's putting the track on the new music source, and then it's the crossfade here. So it's got the one which was the last track being played. It's going to take the current volume and fade that out to 0. And then the current one, which is the one that's getting the new track that's being played, is going to start that at 0 and go back in. And this is what sort of flips it around. That might sound a bit complicated. It took me a little while to get my head around it, to be honest, but I've got it working now. So if I play, now this is going to be right on maximum value. So if I press start now, rather than abruptly change, it's going to fade in the next track. It's going to crossfade them. There. And so it's faded out one and faded in the next one. And I think that sounds a lot better. Let me just wait until he goes to the end of the screen. Okay. So at this point, if I click the explore button, now we can just start to hear that sort of fading out before the next one comes in. It's just a subtle little distinction. And again, if I press my magic button to allow him to escape, same thing. It fades in, it crossfades them. And I just think that sounds just that little bit better. One thing I've been experimenting with today is doing some text effects. So there is a really nice package called TMP Effects, which is completely free. This is on GitHub here. You can just import it into Unity from the URL. There is no code for this. All you do is you take any component which has already got a Text Mesh Pro on it, and then you can add a TMP writer or a TMP animator or both. So in my intro scene, I've just put in a TMP writer, and that just gives it a typewriter effect. So it's really simple. So this just typewrites it out rather than just having it all appear. And so you can just set up various kinds of configuration in here. You've got it's got very good documentation, this particular plugin. Call it plugin, it's not really a plugin. I've got this all over the place now. I've basically been using this game as a way of experimenting with it. So in my gold cave, I do this with scriptable objects, and all you have to do is put tags in. So like I've just got like a grow tag here, a funky tag here, I've got something called a wave there. Now the wave one I really like, and I've used that in particular on my last scene. And for this, you have to have an animator as well. So all you do is, where is it? This is in my narrative panel. So here I've got a TMP animator as well as the TMP writer. And then in my scriptable objects, I've just put wave and then with an amplitude parameter on there to set how powerful the wave is. So what I've done with each choice, the wave just gets ever so slightly stronger. So it's quite a subtle effect, but I think it just adds a little bit of juice, I guess. So it's just very, very subtle in here on the first one. And then the second one, that wave is just a little bit stronger. Third one, a bit stronger sense. I could put something here on Alan's name, perhaps. And then on the last one. So the idea is, you know, he's come out the cave, he's feeling happier, and yeah, that's basically what I wanted. So just a little bit of polish there from a nice little free package. So the next little bit of juice I've added is a bit of screen shake when the snake hits a wall before he's able to escape. So I just show what that looks like. It's not brilliant. I'm not very good at sort of setting these things up, but it's something. So if he hits any wall, it will just give it a little bit of screen shake. So the way I've done that is I had to create a Cinemachine camera. Now this by itself doesn't do a whole lot, but we have a thing called an impulse listener. No, so you have to have that impulse listener, and then you have something called an impulse source. So under my arena object, I've just created some really simple objects here. So this is basically just a box collider, which is just kind of like overlapping the side wall there, so that when the snake hits the wall, it will trigger the collider. And then I've got this thing here, a Cinemachine impulse source. I've fiddled around with this thing. I don't really know what this does, but I've just fiddled around with all these numbers until I've got something that looks reasonable. And then I've just added a teeny tiny little script on there, and all that does is it grabs that impulse source, and it just is one line of code. When the player enters the collider, it just does generate impulse with force. That's all it needs to do. And so I've got 4 of those, 1 for each wall. And then just the other quick little hack I put in is I have to turn them off at the beginning of the scene, because the snake actually comes in through the left wall, and so it was hitting the trigger. So I've just got it so that it turns them off at the beginning, and then 1.5 seconds later it will just turn it back on again. So yeah, just a simple little thing, little bit of a faff to set up, but I think that just a little bit of juice is kind of nice, and I've never really mucked around with screen shake before, so that was cool. Right, that is as far as I can get in this game with my current skill level. I've added a few little finishing touches, that polish, and that's all I can do with it. So at this point, I'm going to say this game is complete. It's been a lot of fun doing it. I'm glad I finally managed to get back into Unity and get started again after that long break. So I'm not entirely sure what's coming next, so I'll put that in another video. Now this video, you're welcome to leave feedback, tell me whether you found it interesting or not, but like I said at the beginning, this really is, I'm doing this for me so that I can look back on this if I think, oh god, how did I do a screen shake, or you know, how did I do this movement or whatever. I've got this as a reference. So yeah, this is for me. If it's useful to anyone else, that's great. If not, never mind, I don't really mind. So yeah, that is it for this video. Thanks for watching. Speak to you next time.